The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus told his disciples this parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out at dawn to hire laborers for his vineyard. And after agreeing with them for the usual daily wage, he sent them out into the vineyard. Going out about 9 o'clock, the landowner saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And he said to them, "You too go into my vineyard, and I will give you what is just." And so they went off. And he went out again around noon and around 3 o'clock and did likewise. Going out at about 5 o'clock, the landowner found others standing around and said to them, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" They answered, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You too go into my vineyard." When it was evening, the owner of the vineyard said to the foreman, "Summon the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and ending with the first." When those who had started about 5 o'clock came, each received the usual daily wage. So when the first came, they thought that they would receive more. But each of them also got the usual wage. And on receiving it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last ones worked only 1 hour, and you've made them equal to us, who bore the day's burden and the heat." He said to one of them in reply, "My friend, I am not cheating you. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what is yours and go. What if I wish to give this last one the same as you? Or am I not free to do as I wish with my own money? Are you envious because I am generous? Thus the last will be first, and the first will be last." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
In the Gospel this morning, Jesus told a story about a group of people who felt cheated by life. And that feeling is not uncommon. And in some cases, it's certainly understandable. Try as we may, there is no escaping the conclusion that life is frequently unfair. No baby deserves to be born into grinding poverty, but many are. Children ought not to grow up in homes that are filled with hostility and bitterness, but many do. People, through no fault of their own, are victimized by natural catastrophes and tragic diseases. It's understandable that some people would feel cheated by life because in a very real sense they have been. But for the moment, these are not the people that I have in mind. I'm thinking about those of us to whom life has been mostly fair, sometimes even generous, and yet we find ourselves still feeling cheated. How should we handle that very human and very common emotion? I think we can start by looking at its cause. Where does it come from? What brings on that feeling that life has been unfair to me. That kind of a low mood can stem from any number of sources: an overload of work, a dreary day, or simply a case of Monday morning blues. But these feelings are fairly simple and usually pass about as quickly as they come. For the people in our story, it was something more serious and enduring. Their feeling was generated by an unfavorable comparison of themselves with others. They had worked a full day and were paid the usual daily wage. Another group had worked only 1 hour and were paid the same amount. And this discrepancy was the basis for their disenchantment. They had agreed to work for a certain amount and were paid for that amount. Still, they felt cheated. Why? Because others who had worked less time were paid the same. This kind of a comparison is a common occurrence. We seldom, if ever, compare our lot with those who have less. Almost always it goes in the opposite direction. We compare what we have with those who have more, and we begin to feel cheated. Not because we really need more, but because we have less than our neighbor. I suppose it is inevitable that we will make comparisons. But would it not make more sense if the comparisons ran in the opposite direction, to the downside instead of the upside? Suppose the people in the parable had compared themselves with the unemployed, with those who went home that day empty-handed because they did not have a job. Now, that kind of comparison could be beneficial because it could create within us a sense of gratitude for what we have and a spirit of compassion for those who have less. Remember the man who said, "I complained because I had no shoes until I met a man who had no feet." But for some reason, our comparisons tend to work the other way. We are content with our circumstances until we meet someone who seems to be doing better. Then suddenly we become discontented and begin to feel that life has dealt with us unfairly. May we move a step further and consider the consequences of this kind of thing. What happens to people when they become convinced that life has singled them out for unfair treatment? All the people who feel cheated by life have at least one thing in common. They are all unhappy. They are unhappy. The moment that you and I convince ourselves that we've been singled out for unfair treatment, we can say goodbye to happiness. It will never be ours again until and unless we change our thoughts and feelings about life. The people in the parable obviously went home unhappy that night. They could not enjoy what they had because they were convinced they deserved more. Self-pity was their closest companion, and a cloud of resentment covered their lives like a fog. That same thing will happen to any of us if we ever convince ourselves that we have been cheated by life. A final thought. We have looked at the cause and the consequence of feeling that life has cheated us. In closing, may I turn our attention to one other thought, namely the cure. All of us from time to time slip into moods of self-pity and begin to feel that life is not dealing fairly with us. How should we respond to that? What can we do with that feeling when it comes? Well, the answer is, as I see it, is so simple that it sounds simplistic. But it's the only effective solution that I know. And it's this: we must take a fresh look at the good things in our lives, the things that we may have forgotten, the things that we overlook, the things that we take for granted. There is a story about a man named W.K. Powell who lived in Nashville, Tennessee during the Depression. This man, unlike many others, had a job. The pay was inadequate, but he had a job. And one day he came home from work to learn that the washing machine had broken down and would have to be replaced. Along with this, his wife reminded him that school would be restarting, and each of their 5 children needed a new pair of shoes. They looked at the classified ads and found a used washing machine for sale. After dinner, Powell drove to the address in a fashionable part of town. He knocked on the door and was greeted by a warm and friendly couple. He stated his business and made arrangements to buy the washing machine. But the man and woman were so gracious that Powell found himself telling them of some of his troubles, including the part about the worn-out shoes. When he had finished, the man led him into a bedroom and showed him a sleeping child. He explained that the child was 12 years old, had been born an invalid, had never walked, and never would. Then, without bitterness, the man said, "We would give everything we have to see one pair of worn-out shoes beside that bed." When Powell got home that night, he and his wife together thanked God for their healthy children and for the 5 pairs of worn-out shoes. It's strange but true that many of life's greatest blessings come to us brilliantly disguised as problems. When you and I feel cheated by life, there is a good possibility that somewhere, somehow, and in some form, we have overlooked some worn-out shoes.